In this week's edition of CivilNet's Business Digest, the owner of the Armenian supermarket chain Nor Zovq has been detained on tax evasion charges. Lebanese Armenian businessman and former Viva-MTS head Ralph Yirikian has been named as the new CEO of rival telecoms firm Ucom. The director of the long-stalled Amulsar gold mine announced that operations will start in 18 months. And rating agency S&P has upgraded the Armenian government's credit outlook. The owner, general director, and chief accountant of the Armenian supermarket chain Nor Zovq were detained for 2 months this week on tax evasion charges following a joint investigation last month by Armenia's State Revenue Committee and National Security Service. The agencies said they acted on an anonymous tip. In a statement, Armenia's investigative committee alleged that the supermarket chain had avoided paying nearly $10.5 million in taxes since 2019 by using a custom software application to purposefully undercount its revenues. The owner of a software company that worked with the supermarket chain has also been arrested in connection with the case. That company has not been named publicly. Nor Zovq denied the allegations in a press release, pledging to cooperate with the investigation while lambasting what it described as, quote, operations aimed at disrupting the normal functioning of the company and causing great damage to it. What is more baffling is the use of state resources to serve other private interests. We are forced to come to such a conclusion, the supermarket chain added, without elaborating. Nor Zovq is one of Armenia's largest and most well-known supermarket chains with almost 30 locations across Yerevan. The company paid about $3.8 million in taxes last year, according to figures kept by the State Revenue Committee. Ucom, one of Armenia's 3 mobile network operators, named Lebanese Armenian businessman Ralph Yirikian as its new CEO this week. In a press release, Ucom said former CEO Ara Khachaturian would stay on at the company, but did not say in what capacity. Yirikian was the longtime head of rival telecoms firm Viva-MTS. During his tenure, the company grew to become Armenia's biggest mobile network operator. In a surprise move last year, Yirikian stepped down after almost 20 years on the job, saying he had decided to focus on other business ventures. Viva-MTS is majority owned by MTS, Russia's largest telecoms company. Ucom is owned by Aram and Gurgen Khachaturian, 2 close relatives of Gagi Khachaturian, Armenia's former finance minister and State Revenue Committee head. He is widely known in Armenia as the Super Minister, in reference to his broad powers when he served in government. The elder Khachaturian has been embroiled in a number of corruption cases since leaving government in 2016, and members of his family are known to hold luxury properties in Yerevan, Paris, and Los Angeles. It will take 18 months of construction and development at the Amulsar gold mine before operations can begin. That is according to Haik Aluyan, the director of the mining company Lydian Armenia, who announced the timeline over the weekend in an interview with the online publication Banks.am. The Armenian government signed a $250 million agreement with Lydian last month in a surprise move that revived operations at the long-stalled mine. In return, Lydian, which is ultimately owned by equity firms in the United States and Canada, ceded 12.5% of its shares in Amulsar to the Armenian government. Development at Amulsar had been indefinitely suspended since 2018, when environmental activists and residents of nearby communities began raising concerns about acid drainage from the project into nearby waterways, as well as the planned use of highly toxic chemicals in a mineral extraction process called heap leaching. Nearly 24 Armenian non-governmental organizations issued a joint statement this week condemning the government's decision to revive operations at Amulsar as, quote, illegal, short-sighted, irresponsible, risky, and fraught with danger for the state. They called on Lydian and the government to release environmental impact assessments and other documents to the public in an effort to boost transparency around the mine, but stopped short of calling for the project to be scrapped entirely. S&P has raised the Armenian government's credit outlook to positive from stable just weeks after Fitch announced a similar upgrade, with both rating agencies citing last year's influx of tens of thousands of Russians. Quote, the war in Ukraine triggered strong inflows of labor and capital from Russia to Armenia, which boosted Armenia's real GDP growth, S&P said last week, adding, quote, there is an increased likelihood that Armenia's potential growth rate will remain permanently stronger than before the war. Armenia's GDP grew by a record 12.6% in 2022, according to preliminary data from the Statistical Committee. Armenian banks saw an unprecedented net inflow of $2.5 billion last year, central bank numbers show, with about 70% of the transfers coming from Russia alone. About 65,000 Russians have moved to Armenia since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, figures from Armenia's Migration and Citizenship Service suggest. Many are highly skilled IT workers. S&P noted it is, quote, unlikely there will be a sharp reversal in financial and labor flows to Armenia in the next 12 months, echoing Fitch's prediction last month that, quote, a substantial proportion of new immigrants will stay in Armenia for at least 2 to 3 years. S&P is forecasting Armenia's GDP will increase by 4% in 2023, while Fitch is anticipating substantially higher growth at 6.3%. In January, the head of Armenia's central bank said he expects the country's economy to expand by 4.6% this year.